I grew up in a farm town in Nebraska so small the welcome sign had extra space on it. We had one gas station with 2 pumps, a school that shared a parking lot with the football field, and a grocery store where the automatic doors groaned open whether you were there for milk or just killing time in the air conditioning. For the first 18 years of my life, I used to joke that only 2 important things ever happened there. The first was me being born. The second was the night Owen Braddock blew up his family's garage. Back then, we didn't know that was what happened. Back then it was just fire, noise, adults yelling, bike tires skidding on loose gravel. I was a freshman then, 14, old enough to think riding around town after dinner counted as freedom. It was a Sunday evening in early fall, one of those Nebraska nights where the heat finally lets go after sunset and the whole town smells like cut grass, diesel, and someone's charcoal grill still hanging in the air from supper. I was out with 3 friends, taking turns doing stupid stuff on our bikes. We'd coast down the hill by the grain elevator with our feet off the pedals, then argue about whose turn it was to buy cherry slushies at Casey's if we got there before dark. I remember my friend Nolan had a baseball card in his spokes, so his back wheel made this machine gun clicking sound every time he moved. Then Curtis Lem came flying down Maple on his bike, standing on the pedals, breathing so hard to his mouth he looked sick. He didn't even fully stop. He just dragged one sneaker against the pavement and shouted, "Braddocks' garage is on fire!" That was enough for us. We went. At that age, you hear fire and your body moves before your brain does. We cut across 2 yards, bounced off a curb, nearly clipped a mailbox, and headed for the Braddocks place on the east side of town, past the insurance office and the row of ranch houses with the same aluminum siding and the same little front steps. We smelled it before we saw it, burning plastic, hot tar. Something sharp and bitter in the back of your throat. Then we turned the corner and there it was. The garage was already mostly gone. Not burning around the edges, not just catching, gone. The whole thing was a bright, roaring shape, throwing heat across the street so hard I felt it on my cheeks from farther away than I would have believed. The vinyl siding on the house next to it had curled up in strips. A pickup in the driveway had a windshield busted into glittering crumbs. The volunteer fire department had 2 trucks there, their red paint flashing orange in the flames, and hoses snaked across the yard and into the gutter. I remember thinking the firefighters looked smaller than usual. You grow up seeing those men at pancake feeds and pep rallies, and then all at once they've got air tanks on, face shields down, and they're moving fast without talking to anybody. A deputy waved us back. We were already across the street by the miller's hedge, but he kept motioning harder, palm out, pushing us farther down. Back! Keep moving! There were plenty of adults there too, standing in little groups in slippers and jeans, arms folded tight. Somebody had brought a cordless phone outside. Somebody else kept saying the same sentence over and over, like if they repeated it enough, it might start meaning something useful. Then the pops started. Not one, several. Sharp cracks from inside the fire. Then a heavier bang that made the firefighters duck low and move. I can still hear the metal sound after that, some part of the garage door track or a shelf, or maybe the roof supports giving way, clanging once and then getting swallowed by the fire. One firefighter actually ran. Seeing that did something to me. Nolan yelled, "Go, go, go," and that was it. We jumped on our bikes and took off so fast my front tire fishtailed at the corner. I pedaled home with my legs shaking and the chain grinding because I was trying to shift while standing up. My mom was in the kitchen rinsing plates when I burst in. The dishwater smelled like lemon soap. My dad was in his recliner with the local news on mute and a seed catalog folded on his stomach. I was talking too fast and had to start over twice. I kept saying they told us to move back, way back, and then there were explosions, real ones, and even the firemen ducked. By morning, the whole school was buzzing so hard it felt louder than the hallway bell. Owen wasn't in class. That made everything worse. At my locker, I heard one version that said he'd been pulled out alive and loaded into an ambulance with burns so bad nobody could tell it was him. In algebra, somebody said the whole family had gone to stay with relatives in Kearney because the house wasn't livable. At lunch, a girl from band swore her aunt heard they'd found a body, but she didn't know whose because there were so many people living there. That part was true, at least. The Braddocks had 3 generations under one roof. Owen's grandparents, his parents, Owen, his brothers, his sister. Their house always had extra cars in the driveway and somebody's shoes by the back steps. By the next day, the rumor part fell away. A body had been found in the garage. The sheriff's office put out a statement, and the grown-ups started using those careful, flat voices they use when they don't want kids asking more questions. The surviving family was staying somewhere else. They wanted privacy. They asked the community to be respectful, but nobody at school could leave it alone. We all kept coming back to the same question. Who was it? Wednesday morning, they called a special assembly. That alone was enough to make every stomach in the building drop. We filed into the gym in rows, the varnished floors squeaking under sneakers, the retractable bleachers pulled out on one side. The county sheriff stood at center court with 2 deputies behind him. Our principal looked pale. The sheriff took off his hat before he spoke. I don't remember his exact words. Time wore that part smooth. I remember the message. Owen Braddock was dead. I remember how the gym changed after that. Not loud, not dramatic. Just 100 kids sitting completely still at once. Somebody sniffing. A bleacher seat thumping because one boy shifted too hard. My own hands pressed flat between my knees. The sheriff said if anyone knew anything about Owen's recent behavior, anything at all, we should come forward privately. He said it carefully, but that was the line everybody carried out of the gym. Recent behavior. Not the fire, not condolences. Behavior. That word did a lot of work. For 2 days, the adults took over. There was a town meeting at the school cafeteria one night. I remember because my parents told me to empty the dishwasher, take out the trash, and put away the laundry before they got back. I said sure, then spent the next 3 hours in the basement playing video games and eating dry Fruit Loops out of the box. I expected to get chewed out when I heard Dad's truck in the driveway. Instead, they both came in quiet. My mother still had her canvas purse on her shoulder. My father shut the front door more gently than usual, which is how I knew something was wrong before either of them said a word. He was the kind of man who usually let the screen door slap behind him. That night, he caught it with his hand. They sat me down in the TV room. The carpet in there had one burn mark from an old space heater and always smelled faintly dusty when the set warmed up. Mom asked how well I knew Owen. Dad asked if he'd ever said anything violent around me, if he'd ever talked about hating people, if he'd ever seemed off in ways I'd noticed. I said no. I knew him the way everyone knew, everyone in town, same school since kindergarten. Shared a science table once. Borrowed a pencil from him in 8th grade English. That was about it. Then I asked them to stop circling around it and tell me the whole thing. I thought I was ready. I wasn't. Owen hadn't died because he knocked over a gas can. He hadn't been smoking in the garage. He hadn't been messing with fireworks. He'd been building a bomb. Not the big one, a smaller one first. A test. Something went off too early. The explosion killed him in the garage and started the fire. For a second, I just stared at my dad's belt buckle because I couldn't look at his face. I remember the brass oval catching the lamplight while Mom started crying beside me, quiet, one hand over her mouth. Investigators had found a notebook and what was left of his things. It wasn't fully burned. Enough of it survived. In it, he'd written out plans for a bigger device. He'd picked the target too. The town hall, not just the building. not empty. During a packed Sunday community event, our town only had a few hundred people. On a full Sunday, with the older families there, the little kids, and the people who only showed up for holiday events but still got counted, he could have wiped out half the town in one shot, maybe more. Dad said the sheriff wouldn't repeat the specific things written in that notebook at the meeting. He only called them deeply disturbing and left it there. Owen had written about other attacks he'd read about. He'd made notes. Measurements, timing, materials. He had a plan. I remember saying, no, not because I didn't believe it, just because there was nothing else to say. My mother cried harder then. My father rubbed both hands down his face and stared at the blank television screen. I kept thinking about Owen in homeroom, Owen in a school picture, Owen at the gas station buying a Mountain Dew, Owen leaning back in a plastic chair at lunch. Normal, normal, normal. That's what my mind kept handing me, like if it stacked up enough ordinary details, it could smooth this into something I understood. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I thought he was coming back. He was dead. That part was settled. It was the scale of it, the distance between the life we thought we lived and the one we almost ended up with. I kept hearing those pops from the garage and realizing they weren't just random sounds in a fire. They were pieces of his plan breaking apart before it ever got to us. If he'd been more patient, if he'd been smarter, if one wire had held and one timer had worked and one test had stayed a test, our town would be remembered for something else entirely. People spent years trying to explain Owen. They said maybe there had been signs, maybe there hadn't. Maybe something in him had been broken for a long time. Maybe he'd hidden it well. Nobody could point to some movie version of the story where everybody had been cruel to him and this was the final result. It wasn't some outcast people spit on in the hallway. He had friends. Teachers knew his name. He grew up in the same flat little place the rest of us did. That almost makes it worse. I'm older now than my parents were that night, and I still catch myself doing math I don't want to do. How many rows were in that hall? How many people sat shoulder to shoulder during the winter holiday program? How far the blast would have gone through plaster and wood and glass? Which families would have been erased completely? Whether I would have been there that morning or home faking a cough to get out of it. When I go back to visit, the garage is long gone. The Braddocks place changed hands twice. Somebody put up a prefab shed with a green metal roof where the old structure used to stand. Kids in town now probably don't know what happened there unless their parents tell them. But I do. And the part that stays with me isn't even the fire. It's the notebook. A boy I passed in the hall had been writing down how to erase us line by line, while the rest of us worried about vocabulary quizzes and whether the vending machine would eat our dollar. He sat in the same classrooms, heard the same bells, watched the same weather roll over the same fields, and somewhere inside that ordinary routine, he was measuring out a future where the rest of us were gone. Sometimes, in places that should feel harmless, I think about that. Folding chairs set up for a school concert, a packed room with one way in and one way out. A garage door pulled shut while somebody works alone under a hanging bulb. And once you know a person can stand that close to everyone else, smiling when they need to, planning when nobody's looking, you never really get all the way back to before. You start listening harder. You notice the metal clatter from the next building over. You pause when you smell sulfur where there shouldn't be any. You hear a sudden bang nearby, and before your mind can label it a muffler or a drop tool or a kid slamming a dumpster lid, your body has already moved. Mine still does, every time.